I farmed sheep in British Columbia, Canada, I used livestock guardian dogs to protect my sheep. Because you see, where I lived, there were kilometers and kilometers behind our farm of forest and wilderness and mountains and hills, and there were lots and lots of wild animals that lived there. We had black bears and grizzly bears and wolves, coyotes, mountain lions or cougars, bobcat and lynx, and every single one of them would have loved to have lamb for breakfast. So I had to use these dogs to keep my sheep safe, to protect them. And livestock guardian dogs are a bunch of different breeds of dogs that are big and they're fierce, and they will protect whatever animals they've grown up with, even if it means fighting to the death to protect them. They are amazing dogs. So when I had my sheep, I bought one dog to protect my sheep, and she was a really good dog. Her name was Debbie, and she was about this tall. She was a big dog, and she was white and fluffy, and she was a really good dog, and she loved her sheep, and the sheep loved her, and they knew that she would keep them safe. And she did a good job. But after a few months, I realized I needed a second dog, because there was a pack of wolves that would come through our farm all the time. I would see their tracks, and they had big tracks, big feet. They were big wolves. And if a couple of them, or 3 or 4 of them, decided to attack Debbie, she wouldn't stand a chance. So I needed another dog to help her protect my sheep. So I prayed about it, and I looked at ads on the internet, and I found a dog who sounded like she'd be quite perfect. And she was a cheap price, so I could afford her. So I made arrangements. I was able to get her transported to where I could pick her up, and I took her home, and I wasn't sure how good a guard dog she was going to be at first, because she loved people. She absolutely loved people. And she hadn't grown up with sheep. She had grown up with 2 goats. So it took a lot of training to get her used to my sheep and get her to want to guard them. And I chained her in the sheep pens for a while so that she had to get used to living with the sheep and not with people. And she was sometimes a little bit disrespectful and pushy with the sheep. And she had to learn good manners with them, and she had to learn to love them so that she'd want to protect them. And they had to learn to trust her so that they wouldn't be afraid of her. And it took a while. And when I first got her, her name was Buttercup. Now she was a large dog like Debbie, but she was kind of a cream color, and her eyes were a very pretty light yellow color. So I think that's why her owner had named her Buttercup. But you should try yelling Buttercup at a dog that's being bad. It's too long of a name. It's too hard to yell. And I had to yell at her a lot in the first few days that I had her, because she was bad a lot. And so I thought, this won't do. I need to change her name. But what am I going to change it to? One day when I was out at the sheep pens, Buffy was being her normal, friendly, cuddly self. And all of a sudden she smelled something. She smelled a wild predator in the wind. She could smell them. And she changed. She transformed instantly. Her hackles went up, her hair on the back of her neck and her back stood on end. And she started snarling and growling and barking and barking and barking. And I thought, whoa, she's going to be a good guard dog after all. That's pretty impressive. So I changed her name. I named her Buffy the Coyote Slayer. She hadn't killed any coyotes yet, but I thought she probably would if she had the chance. And one thing that Buffy did do that I really didn't like, and I tried to train her not to do, was she barked a lot at night when I wanted to sleep. She would bark and bark and bark all night long, and I couldn't sleep. It was terrible. So I thought, this won't do. I'm sure if she and Debbie are just with the sheep, no predators are going to try to eat any sheep then, because the dogs are there. So it's okay. The dogs don't need to bark. So I tried to train Buffy not to bark, but she was very stubborn. She was sure that she needed to bark, and she would still bark even though she knew she was going to get in trouble for it. Early one night, I had chained Buffy up in a shed near the sheep so that she'd be quiet for the night so I could sleep. And Debbie was with the sheep and she knew to be quiet. And I was in the house and all of a sudden I heard Buffy start barking frantically, like really, really excitedly. And I thought, oh, that's a little bit different than her normal bark. I should probably go check it out. So I put my headlamp on my head and I ran out to the sheep pens. And when I got out there and I looked up at the sheep pen, up the hill at the pen, I saw two glowing eyes on the other side of the fence, on the outside of the fence. I thought, oh, what's that? And as soon as that animal saw me, it disappeared into the darkness. And I ran into the sheep pen, and all the sheep were kind of huddled over in one far corner of the pen with Debbie, except for one lamb. There was one lamb still laying on the ground over where I'd seen those eyes. When I went over to look, it was dead. Something had come in and killed one of my lambs. And when I looked at the lamb closer, I realized that it was a bobcat or a lynx. And all the sheep had been sleeping in that area, and the cat must have climbed over the fence very quietly and bit the first lamb that it got to because it wanted to have that for supper. And because I hadn't been letting the dogs bark, they hadn't scared the predator away before it got there. So it was completely my fault that that lamb had died, and I felt terrible. Oh, I felt horrible. It was all my fault. So I went over to the shed and I let Buffy off of her chain and I said, Buffy, I am so sorry. You were doing your job. You were doing your job really well and I messed it up. I'm really sorry about that. And after that, I taught Debbie that she was allowed to bark at night. It was a good thing for her to bark at night. And I did the same thing for Buffy as well. And you know how at the beginning I couldn't sleep when the dogs were barking? After that, I slept so well when the dogs were barking because I knew they were doing their job and they were keeping my sheep safe, right? A couple weeks after that happened, I was in the house about the same time of late evening, early night. It was dark outside and I heard Buffy start barking frantically again, same as before. So I ran out to the sheep pens with my headlamp, and when I got there, by the time I got there, Buffy had squeezed under the fence and she was outside the sheep pen, and she was outside the fence exactly where I had seen the eyes of that cat the first time. And she was barking the exact same way, and she ran off into the dark following the scent of that animal. And I thought, oh no, did it kill another lamb? And I went and looked, and every sheep and every lamb was safe. They were all safe because of Buffy and Debbie. They had scared the cat away. They had done their job because I was letting them do their job, and they kept all the animals safe. And I never, in all the years I farmed sheep, I never lost another lamb or sheep to a wild predator because those dogs worked really hard to keep my sheep safe. And you know, Psalm 91 verse 11, it says, He, God, will give His angels charge over you to keep you in all your ways. Just like Buffy and Debbie protected my sheep, God's angels protect us, right? Now Buffy, after she got used to the sheep, after some time, she got to love her sheep. Absolutely love her sheep. Her ewes, that's mommy sheep, she really loved her ewes. But more than anything, Buffy loved lambs. Absolutely loved lambs. When a new lamb was born, Buffy would go over and she'd sit as close as she could to it with her back to the lamb so that the lamb wouldn't get scared. She wouldn't look at it, but she'd get as close as she could, like she's saying, it's okay, I love you, I'm going to take care of you, I won't hurt you, I'm a nice dog, I love you. And she just loved lambs. She was always like that with lambs. And every year, I sold most of my lambs at the end of summer, the beginning of autumn, when they were quite big. They weren't little lambs anymore. And I kept a few lambs each year for breeding, but most of the lambs I sold. And I didn't realize how hard it was for my dogs when I sold sheep. Until in 2015, it had been a really, really dry summer, and I was running out of feed. I didn't have enough grass for all my sheep, and so I had to sell quite a few of my sheep. I sold some of the ewes, and I sold all of the lambs except for one. I kept only one lamb that year. And it took a while to sell the sheep and to sell the lambs. And it took several trips of me driving them to their new homes in my truck or my ute. Later that autumn, I bought 4 new sheep, and I had to go pick them up with my truck. So when I went to go pick them up, I walked up to the barn to get my truck because it was parked near the barn. And Buffy came out of the barn wagging her tail and happy to see me, all friendly. And I petted her and I went to start my truck. And as soon as the truck engine started, Buffy changed. Her ears went down and her tail went down and her eyes got really sad. And she looked like she realized she's going to take away some more of my sheep. I just know it. She's going to take some more of my family away again. And she turned around and she walked back to the barn. I said, Buffy, no, it's okay. I'm going to bring you some new sheep. And I'm getting some more sheep. It's okay, Buffy. But she was a dog and she couldn't understand me. And she was so sad. She just walked into the barn. She wouldn't even look at me. She completely ignored me. She just drooped. She was so sad. So I drove to get the new sheep. And it took several hours. And when I got back, when I drove up to the barn and the sheep pens, the new sheep in the truck, bad, and the sheep in the pens, bad, back to them, and it was very loud. And I unloaded the new sheep, and as I was herding them into towards their new pen, Buffy squeezed under the gate and came over to meet us. And she was really excited. And so I wasn't sure if these new sheep were going to like her or not. They didn't know her. They didn't know that they could trust her yet. So I said, Buffy, settle down, calm down, be nice. And Buffy did something I've never seen her do before. She was so happy to see those new sheep come that she just could not contain her excitement. She came walking, like running as carefully as she could, as close to the sheep as she dared without scaring them. And she lay down on the ground on her back with her belly up. And so she was telling the sheep in her own doggy way, it's okay, I'm safe, I'm not going to hurt you, it's okay, I love you. And then she couldn't hold it in anymore. So she got up and she ran over to the far end of the sheep pen, into the corner, and she did a happy dance. And she raced in tight little circles around, and she jumped around, and she danced around, and she was so excited. And then she came back to the sheep again very carefully, and she lay down on her back as close to them as she could get with her belly up, and she's like, it's okay, I'm not going to hurt you. I love you. I'm so glad to see you. I'm so happy to see you. And then she couldn't stand it anymore. She got up and she went over to the corner and she did another happy dance. And she ran around in circles again. I had never, ever seen that dog so excited. She was so excited to see new sheep. I hadn't taken away any of her sheep. I brought her some new ones, and she was so happy. And the new sheep, they kind of stood there and watched this dog for a few minutes, and then they seemed to realize that she wasn't going to hurt them. She was okay, and they allowed me to herd them into their new pen. And for the rest of that day, Buffy just seemed to have a big smile on her face the whole time. She was such a happy dog. Compared to when I'd left to pick them up and she was so sad, she was so happy then when I brought the new sheep home. And if a dog can be that excited about new sheep coming to join its family, just imagine how excited God and the angels in heaven are when one of us chooses to be in his family and to follow God. I don't know that God does a happy dance, but I'm sure he is really excited. And in the Bible it says, in the same way, I tell you, the angels of God rejoice over one sinner who repents. It's going to be pretty exciting in heaven when we get there and we get to meet God and his angels. It's going to be a very, very exciting day when Jesus comes back to this earth again. And just remember that no matter how much Buffy loved her sheep, God always loves us more, far more.